Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the War of Ideas. This is episode 39. Today, we have a more libertarian economist, somebody I've been following for quite a while. His name is Germinal G. Vaughn. He's in the caller queue right now. Germinal, I have invited you to speak. There should be some sort of pop-up invitation that you should be able to opt into. Callin is still a new app. People aren't all the way naturalized to it yet, but we're getting there. So Germinal, again, I've been following Germinal for a pretty long time, actually, before I started doing this show. Just, I guess, luck of the algorithm, I suppose. He's really an interesting kind of guy. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking to Dr. Keane, the Australian post-Keynesian economist. So I figured we'd bring in a more libertarian or free market guy to balance it out and see what you guys all think. So just a bit of background. Germinal, you are in the caller queue right now. I'm going to remove you from the queue. And I'm going to once again invite you to speakers so you can come up to this row with me. There should be a pop-up invitation that should allow you to join me. Would love to have you. But yeah, so Germinal is a pretty accomplished independent scholar. He's an economist and an award-winning author. He's also a political scientist. He's a member of the National Association of Business Economics, the Economic History Association. He has a bachelor's degree from the Catholic University of America. He has a non-degree certificate in mathematical statistics from Duke University, and he has written nearly 24 books about all things economics. And he's also the winner of the 2021 Best Indie Book Award for Socioeconomic History. Again, I've been following for a while. Interesting guy. I can't wait to talk to him. Germinal, I'm shooting you invites. You should be getting invites there. If it doesn't work, then you can call in and I can just let you in. But yes, Germinal, I'm sending you invitations to speak. At the top of your screen, there should be a pop-up that allows you to accept this invitation so you can be there you go. You're in the highest tier with the special people like me. All right, welcome. And then at the bottom, there should be the camera and microphone. icons. You just click on those so I can hear from you, see your face, and we'll get rocking here. Hopefully we'll get rocking. I have a couple of interesting questions because we were talking to Dr. Steve Keen, and I am more of a free market guy by default, but Dr. Keen had some interesting ideas about um, a marriage of both the labor economic theory of value and the utility theory of value, where it's kind of profit is use minus cost of production, which I thought was interesting. He also had this idea of, oh, you're here. How you doing, Germinal?
Finally, yeah.
Hey, good
Took
to see
me a
you, man.
while, but I made it.
Hey, good to see you. I'm glad we
Good to see
figured
you
it
too.
out. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for talking to me, for agreeing
Thanks
to
for
this.
having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, first question is, I was looking into your bio a little bit before this, and so you immigrated here. I'm curious, what made you want to immigrate here and study what you study and become such an accomplished scholar? What was the driving force behind that?
Well, I mean, I have to be honest. It's been a roller coaster because my initial goal was to become a politician back in my home country. I wanted to be president. At age 18,
What
I was
country was that
like,
again? Would you remind me?
what's it?
What country was that again? Would you remind me?
I'm from Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire.
Okay.
It's a French-speaking country in West Africa.
Okay.
So that was my initial goal. It was to run for president there when once I reach the normal age to run for that kind of office. So I came here to study political science and then go back. But
Right.
as you stay here longer, things start to change and you start to see better alternatives. So I decided to stay and think that I can accomplish the same kind of dreams in the country. I mean, I realized that wherever you are, it doesn't really matter. Okay, that's not true. Geography matters a lot because based on where you are, there's a lot of factors that are affecting you. But I realized that in the United States, I had more opportunities to climb the social ladder faster
Mm.
because here, it's the country of opportunities, and opportunities doesn't mean that the outcome is granted. It means, on the contrary, that you have to go for whatever idea you have in mind and believe that you can accomplish. So since then, that's what I did. I started writing books because I knew that I was good at writing. I come from a family of intellectuals, so it was a no-brainer for me that publishing books or doing any type of scholarly work was the way to go. So since 2018, I've been into that.
You said you were looking to accomplish the same goals. Are you eyeing the White House here, or
Nah, 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 not at
no?
all. Nah.
No.
No, what I mean by same goal, I mean in terms of magnitude, like the significance of the goal, not the exact, not the goal itself. Yeah,
Sure.
no,
Yeah,
not
well,
the
I
goal.
wanted to talk to you about some of these ideas because I have been a free market guy by default for a pretty long time. Thomas Sowell is the guy who got me into, economics, and he's the guy all over YouTube. But 2 weeks ago, we talked to a guy named Dr. Steve Kane, who is
Yeah.
a post Keynesian type of guy, and he knows more than me, so he evened me out a little bit. So I'm
Oh, he
curious.
knows more than me too. He's been there. He's been teaching economics for a very long time, and I
Yeah.
I highly respect him.
Yeah,
I
no,
do.
he's very cool. I really enjoy talking to him. But he put forth a couple of ideas. And the first one is kind of sacrificing efficiency for the sake of like non-fragility. And this is actually an idea that we see it from people who are more leftist in terms of economics, but also we saw it from people like Donald Trump, who was more of a protectionist kind of guy. And while I'm all for increased efficiency, I think that maybe there's a fair trade-off to be made regarding protectionism and just trying to keep the jobs here, etc. I'm just curious to what you say to that. Do you think that there's an argument there, or do you think that the efficiency and the advantage is just worth it and is just better?
No, I think like to me the way to to maintain efficiency is to free trade, because when we take the case of Donald Trump, who is a protectionist, true, he wants to keep jobs here, but I think it's by doing free, by maintaining free trade, by remaining competitive, that will remain efficient, because you need to know that there is someone who can outpace you, who can outperform you, who can outperform you in order to maintain your efficiency, your productivity to a certain level. So when it comes to specifically trades, I've been a huge supporter of free trade, because I think, to me, this is the way to go. That's the way to maintain efficiency overall.
Well, how do you okay, so I get overall maybe, but, what about areas like, I don't know, the Midwest where, like, we have all these big empty factories now? What do you say to the people whose jobs were exported overseas? Um, what do they do? Do they, like, we're seeing this problem potentially with AI. AI might start replacing more and more people. So,
Yeah.
that seems like, well, like, I get it, like, in the grand calculus of economics, it's more efficient and productive. It's kind of hard to say that because our nation, we don't have a global government. We have nation wide governments. And, usually governments like to look out for number one first. So I'm just curious, like with AI, with the fact that our governments are not concerned with the whole world, but with one very particular country, does that logic still hold, do you think?
Maybe not, like, but I don't know what can we do to prevent the spread of AI when it comes to those remote areas where, people still rely on manufacturing. So, because if AI start replacing jobs in the Midwest, or in the Rocky Mountains, then it's becoming difficult for them. But I don't have yet like a proposed solution that I could give in order to counter that. Because as we evolve, especially since COVID, now the world got into a very technologically driven era, and today, like, everyone rely on internet more and more for everything. But at the end of the day, the internet can it's true, the internet is amazing when it comes uh to communicating and achieving certain things, but the internet in itself cannot manufacture goods, right? So at some point, I understand the point of Donald Trump when he was trying to keep some jobs here. So yeah, as I said, like, it really depends. And for now, I do not have a crystal clear solution to how we can counter AI to affect those areas. But I mean, as human beings are very innovative and inventive, they're going to find a way somehow, to bring AI into the manufacturing sector. And that could be really problematic for the people living in those remote areas.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have an answer either. I was kind of hoping you'd have a magic bullet over there, but apparently not. That's okay. I had more questions. Here's one: is I was going through some of your articles at the Mises Institute, and one of them was about God, what was it? It was about like the economic conditions in Africa. I've heard some podcasts. I forget. I think it was somebody on Jordan Peterson's podcast. I don't remember the name of the guest, but she was talking about the economic conditions in Africa are part of the reason for their economic distress more so than anything else. I saw you wrote something on this and I skimmed it. What are your thoughts there?
Well, you have to be more precise when you talk about economic conditions. What
Sure.
conditions are we talking about? Because there are many things that happen in Africa.
Sure. I mean, I think the more I think the gist. Well, first of all, the specificity is kind of what I was leaving to you, but I think the idea was like regulatory standards, stability of the government, more so, although more so than colonization or natural resources. Not to say that those aren't important, but they always seem to get left out of the conversation. Those seem to be what are focused on in conversations,
Yeah.
and the modern day rules and regulations we have set up or they have set up there and not talked about. And I saw you wrote something on this, so I was just
Yeah.
kind of curious. What do you think Africa would need to do to, catch up? In your mind, if
Yeah,
anything.
sure. So the three main reasons why I was actually writing an article about this earlier today because I'm going to launch a newspaper eventually. So I was like filling out content. But the
Well,
three reasons are the three reasons are first, the fact that we do not manufacture our own goods. So basically our own raw material, we don't transform them into consumer goods. The second is the lack of political, the lack of faith in the political institutions of African governments. And third is the lack of free trade among African countries. So, many people always argue that colonization is the reason why Africa has these old conundrums. Although colonization did play a role, it's no longer relevant today because after after colonization, so in the independence era, many African leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, they all adopted the common style economy, so the Soviet style economy,
mhm,
and of course we know where that led those
mhm.
countries. More they became very inefficient, corrupt, autocratic
See, I
people.
was informed that the USSR only fell because of capitalist smothering. That's what I was told.
No,
I was reliably informed that it would be
no,
alliance if it weren't for the
no.
fact.
This and the funny thing is that all these countries who that tried end up having the same fate. They failed because they were inefficient, they were corrupt. They um, so inefficient, corrupt. Basically, there was no price, so they could not coordinate the economy
Right.
as it should be.
Well, they
So
tried to do it centrally, and like Lenin admitted that he couldn't do it, which is
yeah,
incredible.
exactly. And for
He
some reason,
literally
they believe that they could, although it was obvious that they couldn't because it's too much, it's too big. So so there is that factors because like African countries had a lot of raw materials, as we know, but they don't have the technology to
use it.
transform all these materials. So the industrialized nations buy those materials, manufacture them into consumer goods, and sell them back to African nations at a higher price. So because you do not have the power to transform your own materials, therefore you cannot dictate price. So Africans have to pay for those materials that come from the ground, from their own ground, at a higher price because they lack the materials they lack the technology to transform those materials into consumer goods. And in Africa, if you notice, between 1960 and 1990, it was all pretty much every African country was a dictatorship.
Mm,
Yeah, for 30 years, but that was also because of the Cold War. So technically, you have to choose between the US or the USSR. So every African country had like a one party system. There was no free
mm.
democratic elections like there is today, even though African countries are not very democratic. Some are becoming that way, but democracy is not fully uh, um, instilled in African culture because we do not have a constitutional personality. We do not trust our institutions yet. Whenever there's an election, the losing candidate will always cry fraud. He manipulated the results,
Oh
and
no,
etc. and etc.
sounds
So
eerily familiar.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's very painful because if you notice, like almost except for China, but China, it's I will talk about it in a second. Almost every advanced country in the world has um, a very stable political system. Because
Mhm.
without a stable political system, you cannot have capitalism. Capitalism needs stability for investments.
Right, because nobody
So
wants to risk their investment in a country that's on the edge of revolution every 5 seconds, right.
exactly, exactly.
Right.
That's why countries like the United States or Canada or even Western Europe, like they're all stable. So you know that if you put your money there, you're pretty much safe. You know that you get some returns. But Africa has been unstable. Many coup d'état and corruption. So it has been very difficult to establish a strong political institutions that people can rely on. So far, Africans are not accustomed yet to having strong political institutions. It's a process. It's a process, but I don't blame them because every people have their stage of maturity too.
Right.
Today, um, Western nations are politically mature because they have reached a level where they understand that the greater good matters than the individual in certain instances. That is why today Western nations rely on their political institutions to preserve private property.
Right.
Back in Africa is not the case yet. So it's something some countries started to implement some strong private property laws, but they
Wait,
still
they
do
don't
not
even have
promote.
private property yet?
No, no, they do, but what I'm saying is that they're not preserved like the way it is here. You see,
Mm,
here we have a lot of laws that protects private property. You know that you have nothing to worry about. Back
right.
there they are, but they're not but the institutions are not strong enough to
Mm,
preserve that.
I see.
And this
Okay.
is also because in African culture we put the collective above the individual. Whereas in Western nations, we put the individual above the collective. So when you put the individual above the collective, obviously you're going to prioritize private property. But when you
Right.
put the collective above the individual, you cannot prioritize private property because if everyone owns it, no one is responsible.
And ironically, prioritizing the collective is actually not great for the collective. So
Exactly. And but
a lot of
people
ways.
don't understand that. The only people who understand it are those who promote it. The
Yeah.
politicians always promote, do it for the people. I'm a man of the people. It is always for the people
Mhm.
because they're looking to help themselves, as Thomas Sowell said. And the last part is the lack of free trade within African countries. You see, when you look at David Ricardo's model of comparative advantage, he was saying, like, for example, Portugal and Spain will trade the goods that
Yeah.
they manufacture the most or the best. African countries don't do that. African countries trade with the outside world, so Western world, the Western world, South America, and Asia. But you will not see, for example, Ghana trading with Togo or Nigeria trading with Cameroon. And this is a problem. And you can see that it actually reflects on the fact that to go from one African country to another, you even need a visa. From France to go to Germany, you don't need a visa. You just ride
That's
along
true.
because the
Yeah.
Schengen is a Schengen area. But in Africa, you do need a visa to go from I don't know, from Nigeria to Cameroon or from Cameroon to Namibia because African countries do not they do not cooperate with each other because of the lack of free trade. Because if there were free trade, you see they will have all these agreements that will facilitate um, transactions of goods and services between those countries, and it will facilitate immigration too. You see, for example, like in countries like South Africa, immigrants are still um, they're still oppressed because there are people like Julius Malema who are saying that black immigrants, not even white immigrants, black immigrants are coming to take our land. The typical rhetoric of,
Mm.
is the other's fault if you're poor and etc. So these stuff are still very unfortunately relevant in Africa right now.
Right. So I actually have a question for you about something you said earlier. You said that one of the main reasons why Africa is having problems is because it doesn't manufacture its stuff in house, right? It just creates raw materials and goes out. And I'm noticing this weird parallel to what we were just talking about in the U.S. How we have gutted our factories and put those jobs overseas, and now we don't manufacture a whole bunch of our own stuff. Again, like most of that gets put over towards South Asia and those kind of areas for various reasons. And yet the America is really rich. So what's the difference there exactly? Why is it okay when we do it? I guess is the question.
It's because of so two reasons. First, the fact that one of the first things America managed to do really well is to create a political system that was stable, that people can believe and rely on. At the end of the day, Americans overall don't like government. Now they kind of want more government, but overall they still don't like government that much, right? So, but they believe that government exists to do certain things. And one of those things is to preserve life, liberty, and property, specifically property.
Yep.
So that if you own whatever resource you own, if you've been arbitrarily deprived of that resource you own, you can use the court of law to get your restitution from that resources.
Right.
So this is something that in the American system it was well established. So in that case, that's why capitalism start working properly, because we have all the political mechanism to facilitate to facilitate market mechanism. Because as I said, you need political stability first and foremost in order to have a capitalist system that works efficiently.
So it would be okay.
So
Oh, sorry. Keep going.
no, no, go on, go on, go on.
So it would be okay if Africa wasn't manufacturing its own stuff and it was selling if it had a stable enough government. Is
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because if Africa manufactured its own stuff, Africa then would have the leverage power to bargain its price. Because say we manufacture those goods that you like and you want, so we're going to dictate you our price. We're saying we're going to sell you these materials at that price. So now the
right.
industrialized nation has to buy it because they
Right.
don't have
But they
that.
need a
But
stable government to use that leverage, and at the moment they just can't.
yeah, they need, because yes, because the a stable government is what enables market mechanisms, right?
Okay.
Because if you have different markets, different merchants operating, you want to make sure that competition is healthy. And one of the ways to have a healthy competition is to have laws that will prevent monopolies. Don't get me wrong, monopolies, of course, is a natural part of liberalism. It's a natural part of capitalism because if you're the best at what you're doing, everyone will go to you. So
Right.
as everyone goes to you, well, you're out competing everyone else. And that's what we saw with John D. Rockefeller with the oil industry, because he was so good at what he was doing. He was even running his um his oil business at a loss to drive his competitors out. And that's what happened. So everyone started buying kerosene, and he was able now to consolidate that into what we call the oil standard trust, where he buy all his competitors and create a so it became a monopoly. The same was with Vanderbilt and etc. So with the robber barons.
Are
So
monopolies not a bad thing because
what's
they
it?
kill? Are monopolies not a bad thing because they kill competition?
The problem with monopoly is that because you're the only seller, you don't have to innovate.
Right.
But since we live now in a global market, so even if you have a monopoly in your region or in your country, there is a competitor somewhere else on the other side of the world. So, especially with the internet now, if
Hmm.
people don't like what you're doing, they will buy it from your competitor who is in Japan or Korea or in Australia, wherever.
Right.
So, but at the time of the robber barons, the world was not that interconnected.
It wasn't so
So,
big.
if you have the monopoly on a market, that's your kingdom. That's
Hmm.
your empire. But now, like, it's hard to have a full scale monopoly and especially maintain that monopoly for a long time.
Right. So monopoly and antitrust laws. Teddy Roosevelt like to do that sort of thing. Trust buster. Where are you on that? Because again, this is where I'm a little bit more like moderate. I like to think of myself as a free market guy, but anti-monopoly and antitrust laws have always made sense to me just because competition is important.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? Do you think that they are unnecessary? Do you think that they're harmful? Do you think that they're good? Where are you on those types of restrictive laws overall?
No, I think antitrust laws are necessary
Okay,
because that will enable to maintain healthy competition. But now, where there is a problem is when the government itself becomes a player in the economic game,
the
because
laws.
they're the ones in charge of the laws. So they will apply the law to everyone but themselves. That's where it becomes a problem. Otherwise, like antitrust laws, in itself are good, because you don't want a monopoly. Because, as I said, when you have a monopoly, you basically control the entire market. Therefore, you don't have to innovate the product or service you're selling to people. You know that people have no choice. They have to buy whatever you're selling them. So you
Right.
can keep increasing the price without innovating. But when you have competition, so when you have antitrust laws that force competition, you can have a monopoly. So you have to reduce your price and keep innovating to stay afloat.
Right.
So antitrust laws are necessary, but the issue, as I said, it's government itself. If the government is just the referee, right, of of supervising, making sure everything is fine, that's okay. And that was the case uh, before the Great Depression,
Right.
because before the Great Depression, government was quasi non-existent. Government spending was barely 3% of total GDP. So 97% was just people like you and I, although we did not live at that time, but it was regular people, ordinary people, creating the economy, like producing wealth. And now, and since the Great Depression, government now became an active actor in the economy. So instead of just like implementing the laws that would facilitate the creation of wealth, the government also said that we can create wealth too, but with what money? Government doesn't create things.
Right.
Government has no doesn't create that doesn't produce any uh product or service on its own. The
Well, what
money
about the
they
dam?
get. What I say?
Hold on. I'm gonna play devil's advocate for the government, which is not
Sure.
something I usually do. What about
Sure.
the dams? Government build a whole bunch of dams. That's not just printing money. That's useful. A whole bunch of
In
jobs too.
In fact, those dams were made by private corporations that had government contracts.
Well,
The same.
what's the difference really? If the government
Well,
is, like if they hire, like they're doing the same thing with SpaceX. There's like, you're better at this, but we want to pay for it to help you produce it. I'm gonna hire you. Is that fine, or is that the government still being a referee, or like like that sort of thing, where the government hires out private companies to do stuff?
when the government hires private companies to do stuff, technically the government even becomes like a shareholder, because the companies it's in itself, when it comes to those projects like building a dam or building like a rocket, these are stuff that needs government approval. So, in order to get government approval, government also wants to be a shareholder in your company, so that whenever profit you make, government gets its cut
Right.
of the profit. So this is one of the reasons why they mainly hire private companies to do that. But when government try to do things itself, when the government has the full control of an industry or a market, usually they're inefficient. I say usually, not always. For example, the military is a good example where the government is pretty much efficient here, because the United States has the greatest military in the world. And this is an industry that is completely controlled by the government. There is no sure there are private contractors that come in and out,
Yeah.
but it is not a sector dominated by the private market or by the private sector. It is for government. Same with courts. The United States, sure, it's not perfect, but it has a very efficient legal system compared to most legal systems in the world.
Right.
So, and this is something that the government is in charge of. But also, that's why because this is one of the basic functions of government, to preserve, protect, and defend the welfare of the people, against foreign and domestic
Right.
enemies,
Sure.
and to have to adjudicate disputes. So that's why we have courts. So these are the stuff that government is meant to do anyway. So it makes sense that they're good at it. And Adam Smith argued in The Wealth of Nations that the government can do some stuff. They can expand a little bit on some industries such as infrastructures, highways, bridges, roads,
Hmm.
normal roads, or education. Even Thomas Jefferson believed that the government has some sort of a role to play in education. And when you say government, it's not necessarily the federal government, but
Right.
even the local government
Yeah.
having a curriculum that will help, the most in need to have access to education. So there's some sectors where government is involved, but when you look at the education system, for personally, I believe that government has been very inefficient in that sector. Because and now look at public school. What are they teaching our kids?
Right.
It's ludicrous. So
Right. Our test
yeah.
scores are not impressive, globally speaking. Um, I have more questions there, but I actually have to get to something in chat. One of our guys named Johnny GL had a question for you. He said that a friend of mine is unable to get a hold of a prescription drug because of the brittle supply chains controlled by China. So, isn't that where free trade leads us? Basically, I think the idea is in the pursuit of free markets, we make our supply chains we get hyper specialized, and that makes us more efficient. But it also means our supply chains get longer and more complicated, and therefore more brittle. I mean, this is something Dr. Keene was talking about: is like stop worrying about efficiency. We're rich enough. Start worrying about being anti-fragile. What do you think about this idea?
I don't think Professor Kinney is necessarily wrong on that, because, as I said, capitalism has a downside too. Sometimes too much efficiency leads to overproduction.
Mhm.
And when it makes it harder for people to have access to basic needs, then it becomes that's when people start resenting the very system that helps everyone becoming richer. But it's true, yeah, the United States has reached a point where we're like sufficiently rich, but it doesn't mean that we should also stop. But I think that's where like some regulations have to be put in place, again, to maintain things to maintain things in balance. Because absolute free trade may not necessarily lead to a greater outcome or to a better outcome. But also complete protectionism doesn't lead to a better outcome either. So I think it's a matter of when government should step in, but that involvement should be limited. And that's where the issue is that government doesn't know when to stop, because they take on debt and they feel like they need to get it more into it.
Right, the do
So
something mentality. That's
yeah,
the
and by
problem.
doing
Government
something, they're
must do
doing too
something.
much.
Yeah,
By doing something, they're doing too much, and when they try to back out, it's too late. They're just like, oh
right.
man, I'm in that toxic relationship. I have to stay now. I can't go. I can't get out. It's something like that.
Yeah, it's yeah, toxic relationship, yeah. Government's like a needy ex. Um, so we were talking about so yeah, this idea. So like for example, the government is good or should be dealing with acting as the fire department or the police force, but not so much for a public service. As those should be public services, but things like healthcare not so much. It seems to be. Emergency services is one thing. Um, but honestly, this is something that I've struggled to talk about when I have economic conversations is healthcare because it's so weird and complicated and it seems like the public is in bed with the private. And people often point to American healthcare prices as proof as why private entities and why the free market can't handle healthcare. And then they point to things like the Nordic countries as a reason why public single payer options work. Um, I'm curious for your thoughts on this. If you could help me walk through this a little bit because um, it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah, sure. So one thing to understand is that um, in the American healthcare systems, hospitals and pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of money on R&Ds.
Right.
And R&Ds are the reasons why healthcare is expensive in the United States, because this country has the latest technology when it comes to discovering new disease and applying preventive methods to contain the spread of the disease. Because when was the last time Europe developed like the latest technology to prevent some major healthcare issues? None.
Europe, never. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's
Yes, true.
because
Everyone
we
has
have all the
access to.
profit incentives.
Wait, what you say?
Because we have all the incentives to the companies because they'll get the most money if
Exactly.
we do it here.
Right? Like, true. Healthcare is cheaper in Europe, so everyone has access. But when you grant access to everyone by reducing the cost, What it means is that you're reducing the quality of the product or service you're giving them, and that has been applied not just in healthcare but in education, in housing. That's what Lyndon Johnson did, for example. Like you make things accessible to everyone. Not that it's bad, but when you make things accessible to everyone, what happens? It increases demand, and because it increases demand, so the product or service you're delivering has to be of lower quality, because in order to increase the quality, there's a cost of good in it that people don't talk about. When you produce something, there's the cost of good. That's what leads to gross profit. And the cost of good, the cost of production, it costs a lot of money. So if you want to do something of quality, you have to increase the price. And
Well,
because, yeah, go on.
Well, this arrangement doesn't seem particularly fair because what it sounds like is that America is basically doing the yeoman's work. We are eating the healthcare costs and in order to fund R&D. And because we're the ones that where all the R&D is living, all the other nations can have more socialized healthcare without any of the downsides because the R&D is being handled by us. Is that a fair assessment or am I misunderstanding?
No, so what, as I said, what the R&D help us do is to stay ahead when it comes to the healthcare industry. And because we're staying ahead, we're able to provide quality service that the countries who use socialized medicine cannot. Of course, the countries that use socialized medicine, they have one advantage is that everyone has access to healthcare conditions. But
Right.
the healthcare services that they have access to are the basic services. If someone needs a surgery that cannot wait, but you have a socialized medicine program or
Right.
system, and that thing cannot wait, what you're going to do? You see, gonna have to wait. There are
Right.
many studies that have been done on the English healthcare system, the Canadian healthcare system. They both countries have the single payer system. I even wrote an article about that, explaining why it's not an efficient system,
Right.
because
And then they
what
come
the
here.
government is trying to do is to tell people that we have the solution for every single problem that every single person has, and that's not true.
Right.
When you have access to healthcare based on a socialized medicine program, what the government gives you is just access to the basic needs, but not to the most complicated, sophisticated needs that.
And for that, they come to America. So we have a
Exactly, and for
caller.
that they come to America.
So we
That
have a
that's
caller. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm
go
so
on.
sorry. We have a caller who is has limited time due to personal reasons. Masha is a fellow host. Welcome, Masha. How you doing?
I am good, good. I have a statement. I need to correct your
Do you have a question or
misunderstanding
is it
about something
statement?
and then a question as well. So,
Okay.
first of all, I want to tell you both that the Oxford University vaccine was developed in the UK by Oxford University, and that is in Europe. So, that became AstraZeneca. That was ripped away from the state-sponsored program that, like, the entire cost of research was borne by the public, and then it was privatized. It was handed to a private company to make profit. So that is an innovative mRNA vaccine for COVID that was developed with public money in Europe. So please do correct your knowledge on that in the future. So my question is, if the state intervenes only insofar as it wants to help corporations, what right does it have to collect taxes from the public? Why would the public give any money to the state if it doesn't do anything for them?
Okay. There's a couple things there. Germinal. I mean I have some thoughts, but I think I'll let you. I think I'll let you ask those. So the first one is why not let the universities do the innovation? Um, and then the second one is why pay taxes? What is government good for? Um, I guess those are the two. So yeah, take it away, man.
Yeah, I mean, her point is valid, absolutely. First, why we don't let the university? I think it's because of government grants. So that's why even like doctors have sometimes trouble, uh, you know, talking against government when they don't agree with certain research that they're conducting, but because the government granted, so they have to go along with what the government wants to do. Now when it comes to why are we paying taxes when the government is in bed with corporations? that's a really valid question, and it's always it depends on politicians. Politicians know how to appeal to people's emotions. They know that when we say we need to collectivize healthcare, we need to do things for the public, people are more willing to to pay taxes. I remember the two last elections, 2020 and 2016, when we were talking about the healthcare issues. Many Americans say that they were willing to they wouldn't mind paying more in taxes just for healthcare, because that's when the single payer system was becoming very popular with Bernie Sanders. So, and politicians pay they play on that to make people believe in socialized medicine, and that's why people are able, that's why the government is able to collect more taxes, because governments will say, oh, we need to improve Medicare and Medicaid. So in order to improve Medicare and Medicaid, we need to raise taxes so that we can have a more solid budget to purchase new equipment, to provide better services, and etc. And these are stuff that usually Americans are compassionate, so they're willing to say, okay, we're going to spend more money on that. But as you say, like, the part is that the government doesn't tell us the people, that they're in bed with corporations, because we always complain about big pharma, but government doesn't do anything substantial to prevent uh, the um, the expansion of big pharma on the healthcare industry.
So yeah, there's a couple things there. So again, what do you think about the idea specifically that what if we don't need to have a privatized pharma, privatized healthcare in order to have R&D? Could the universities not do it themselves? Could we just replace private R&D with university research? Do you think we get the same results? And then why or why not?
I
Um,
mean, it's possible, because at the end of the day, most universities are even private too. So for
oh,
those,
okay. Oh, yeah.
yeah, it all depends on those
Just
on
just
donations, because yeah,
right. What about just
yeah,
public
if
universities?
I was about to say, if for example Harvard wants to conduct a study for a new R&D, Harvard is a private university, so um,
Right. And I think also, like, she gives the example of the AstraZeneca vaccine,
mhm,
COVID-19. That's something that, like, gets the public's attention, right? Because
yeah,
everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, we're all gonna die." It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it seems like for a lot of our other R&D, it's kinda not stuff that most people think about until the solution already exists. It's just, I don't know, like, it's hard for me to buy the idea that, like, the public universities are going to produce as much, research and development of a similar quality to what the entirety of the private entities can produce. And I'm like, I mean, are you with me on the skepticism, or do you think I'm, maybe overdoing it?
no, I mean, I on that one, as I said, it really depends. It's not black and white. It's always gray. There are other factors, that come into play. So I think public universities can do an actual good job. Like, if they're given the proper funding, if they're left alone to do genuine research, because sometimes those research they're conducting are also pressured by some by an agenda too.
Well, they'd
So
have to yeah, well, they'd have to be given a lot of funding because, like, most research for new drugs, like, fails. Like, it is a very
yeah,
fail-heavy industry. Like, if we were
yeah,
to do that, they would to match what the private industries are doing, they'd have to be a major glut on our budget. Like, I mean, what's one more, right? I mean, we're so far in debt, but, it's a very fail-heavy industry for sure.
yeah,
Um and again, like this example of the example she gives is like she gives AstraZeneca, but like that's a very singular event in time. And
yeah,
it's not typical that they're coming out with massive innovations. Like you can point to some, of course,
yeah,
but it's not usually what happens. And I rather innovate in preemptively rather than reactively, I
yeah.
think is, you know,
Yeah, that's actually a good point you're mentioning here. Yeah, because yeah, the AstraZeneca was a reactive innovation to combat something that was already happening, compared
right.
to developing something in order to preempt is that thing from happening.
Yeah. I think there's another question here too. Um, it was a question I asked original. Dang it, I lost it. It's so sad. I lost my question. It was a good question too. I promise you it was. Um,
That happens to me all the
it was
time. Like
it
I have
was
stuff
about
in mind and then they go.
no, then it goes. Yeah, no, it was about healthcare again though. Just because it's so interesting. It's just no, it's completely gone. It's okay. I'll ask you about something else. It's completely gone. I have no idea.
It will come back.
Oh, yeah, I remember. So here's something that's a kind of interesting idea. Again, I've softened a little bit. Is you could get more socialistic the more local you get, right? So maybe like a single payer healthcare system for like the entire U.S. is a bad idea, but it worked for the Nordic countries. It worked for them because low population, low
Yeah,
immigration, heterogeneous
yeah,
culture.
yeah,
Also, they are healthy and they are not
yeah.
40% obese like America is. Um, Jesus Christ. But
It's
you
true
know,
though.
but maybe you could do because of that, you could do like a single payer healthcare system, like maybe county by county or something. Do you think that would work? Do you think that's the proper role of government if the government is that small, or do you think it's still kind of an economic sacrifice that doesn't make sense?
So Nassim Taleb said, at the federal level, I'm a libertarian. At the state level, I am a Republican. At the regional level, I'm a Democrat, and at the municipal level, at the local level, I'm a socialist.
At
So,
the level of the family, we're all communists.
exactly. So,
Yeah, I
socialism is
understand.
actually very efficient at the local level because it's
Right,
small, so you can
right.
control.
You have the trust
So, a
built in.
single payer system at the local level could work. There's actually a stronger chance that it could work, definitely. But not at a national level when you're managing 300 million people. No way.
And this is why it might be like an apples to orange comparison when they say we America should be like Norway, and it's like, hold on, guys.
Nah.
No, like you mean like New Hampshire should be like Norway. That's like a very much more fair comparison. Although didn't
And I,
yeah,
I think they even tried the single payer system in Vermont because
right.
Bernie Sanders is the senator from Vermont, and but it didn't work. It
Why
didn't
not?
work. I don't have all the specifics why it didn't work. I need to read more about this, but he tried because he's been promoting the single payer system.
Right.
Sorry,
Maybe it's just
for,
not
for
local
for
enough.
quite a while. So the least you can do if you promote something is to be is to lead by
Try it.
example,
Yeah.
implement it yourself, and see what's up. And he tried, and it looks like it didn't go through
Right.
in Vermont. So
Well, yeah. I remember my original question now.
there you
Pat
go.
This is something I've been thinking about. Because to me, it's pretty crazy that like insulin has existed for a very long time. And yet it's still very, very expensive. And the reason that I have been given is it's because of basically a lack of competition. The patents are and one, and there's just you can't have competition, and you're left in a bit of a dilemma, right? Because you want patents, you want people to have intellectual property rights because it incentivizes the production of the stuff in the first place. But if you don't have competition, then nobody can afford it. So I mean, how do you properly strike that balance? Is could you make an argument that like we just shouldn't have patent laws and it just be cutthroat free market stuff? Or I mean, what do you think?
No, I think patent laws are important. I think personally, I think it's important to protect intellectual property. I know many libertarians are against intellectual property, but
What? Really?
yeah, I know I know there's some who are against patent laws and intellectual property because when you have a lot of patent laws and intellectual property, then it becomes harder for others to compete based on the fact that you were the originator of the idea. So
Well, how long should that last though? Because again, insulin is still under patent. Like you can't like people can't
that
compete for insulin.
that I don't know. That I don't know. And it's funny because so my wife she's actually she's doing a master's in health policy, and we read together an article that was talking about the government of California, the Attorney General of California, suing I think two or three pharmaceutical companies that had a monopoly on insulin. So, and they were suing them and say like, you guys need to you guys need to democratize this so that other pharmaceutical companies can compete too. But where now the government kind of messed up was that they wanted to start manufacturing insulin themselves. I was like, I don't know about that. Usually, when government wants to start manufacturing things, I'm not. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
I,
kind of
I don't
like,
buy it. I mean, it
yeah,
feels
I
like the easiest.
understand if they want to implement antitrust laws against the pharmaceutical companies to break their monopoly over the insulin market. That I understand. But to go all the way to become now an actor themselves in
Right.
this market and producing, it's I don't think it's going to lead necessarily to a better outcome.
We have some action in the chat. Psalm one K dot is welcoming you. He thinks that it's a revelation that you're here.
Yeah,
And then
so it's
Solomon,
comment.
yeah, Solomon Altamimi says the idea that you can own ideas is quite ridiculous philosophically. Maybe it's ridiculous philosophically, but again, like if you don't have a right to your intellectual property, you have almost no incentive to create anything because it's just going to get stolen like immediately, and you won't be
Yeah,
able to. So I mean, we got to find this balance where like the patent
exactly.
good enough to incentivize production and innovation, but not
Yeah,
so much that it kills competition. I mean,
exactly.
wherever that line is, I feel like we're missing it at the moment.
Yeah,
Um,
I think everything is about I think everything's about moderation. At the end of the day, it's about finding the perfect middle. You know, I know the word perfect is sounds utopian,
sure.
but like you cannot have too much of one thing because excesses lead to bad outcomes, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like the easier solution than the government just starting to manufacture insulin would probably just to be like, just cut off the patents, right? Like the government is the one who enforces patent law. Like if they just,
Yeah.
and it's like, all right, your guys' patent is up in 5 years. You are not finding another loophole. This is over. Like you guys are done compete now. You guys, you had a good run, and you also have a head start in terms of how you manufacture this. But like you can't charge, we're not letting you charge this much anymore, and that would be way more effective than like price what's the word, price controls, right? Because from what I understand, price controls are like always a bad idea, like in every case, always. Am I correct in understanding this, or am I
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of evidence on price control because they always lead to shortages because when you put price floors or like it never leads to good outcome. I know the Soviet Union, that's how they basically run the economy on price control. Cuba did the same thing. uh, Many African countries during the independence era, that's what they did too. They had like
right?
basically everything was based on price control, and it
In
made
Cal,
things
I'm
work.
from California, so I'm very familiar with the price control song and dance. Masha is saying this very much sounds like hens arguing for the expanded rights of foxes. Yeah, I've heard this argument from people who disagree with me about how I'm like a sheep, like, like praising the wolf or something. Like, I'm pretty sure the whole argument is about whether or not, like, there's wolves or in the first place. They build like their assumptions into this argument. It's a little grody. Like, I don't think that's true. I don't believe that. Johnny GL, if you think price controls are not always bad, please tell me the examples that you have, because from my experience, again in California, we have like, it takes 10 years to build anything. Our zoning laws suck so bad. And then on top of that, we have price controls, which kills incentive to build more stuff. So like you said, we're in a constant shortage. That seems like a pretty inescapable problem.
Yeah,
It seems to be this conflation of like thinking that price and cost are the same thing, right? Because no matter what you say the price is, the cost of production isn't going to change.
yeah.
Um, Although I have a couple, God, I have like three more questions for you now, but they all go in different directions. So I'm going to try to bring them back. The first one is about Cuba. I have been reliably informed, reliably, I tell you, is that the only reason that Cuba is failing is because of Western embargoes. And it's really the capitalist's fault. Otherwise, it would be a communist utopia. Is this correct? Why or why not?
Oh
Or you might, I don't know if you have personal knowledge of
no, I mean I know a little bit about Cuba, but not my knowledge is not as deep
okay.
to give like a substantial answer on this. But I
Yeah.
know that the embargo did play a role, and I think the embargo helped Fidel Castro a lot in the long run to maintain his power over the Cuban people. Otherwise, uh, yes, I agree that it would have been a communist utopia because at first, like Cuba started really well with all the free stuff, but eventually you run out of money, and that's the same thing. That is the same thing that Venezuela did too with Hugo Chavez. The same
Right.
pattern.
Yeah. Um, we have Johnny GL just called in, so I'm going to forget the other two questions I had, and we are going to let him in. He's going to attempt to give us, I think he's going to try to give us an example of when price controls are good. Johnny, welcome to the show. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, how you doing? You guys hear me all right?
Yeah,
Yep.
I hear you great, buddy.
Oh, nice, cool. Hey, enjoy the show. You guys have some interesting discussions. Big fan of the Steve Keen interview. I was trying to get in there, but pesky work gets in the way during the day. Would you believe that?
Yeah, God, you got to work for a living. That's
I
horrible.
know
You
it's
should always
terrible, isn't it? Getting in the way of mighty fine economics discussions.
Yeah,
No, I don't think price controls are crazy talk. I mean, obviously, there's certain situations where they, can lead to distortions and, and disincentives for investment and things
sure.
like that. But, Nixon used them fine during the early '70s. During the OPEC embargo. I mean, if you have a bunch of producers that don't believe in the long term investment prospects for a particular product or service, but there's a lot of short-term demand and an imbalance between that supply and demand. Price controls can prevent gouging. You know what I mean? Because otherwise you're just making people, you're just redistributing money. And if you're not inducing investment, and a lot of times you're not, right? Like if you look at short-term spikes in oil prices, a lot of oil producers are trying to maintain capital discipline because maybe they have fewer environmental regulations, or maybe they're just scarred from overinvestment during the mid 2010s. Because there was a lot of overinvestment, especially in the shale formations and the fracking areas, right? So they all want to cut back, right? Wall Street tells them to cut back on investment, show some real capital discipline. So when oil prices, natural gas prices spike, they're not really going to invest. You're not inducing investment. And that's the whole crux of the argument for letting prices float, right? So in cases like that, I think it makes perfect sense to like put an excess profits tax on these companies, or whether you do that at the consumer price level where you tell consumers, all right, you can't rip off the consumers, or whether you say, actually, no, we want consumers to restrict their own demand to try to bring things back into balance, but we're going to tax your excess profits to restrain you guys from just gouging people. There's a number of ways you can do that. Like I said, Nixon did that, in the early 1970s to try to take the edge off of inflation. Maybe it's not a great long-term strategy, and you can have currency controls that leak over time, or certain situations where it does lead to some bad outcomes. But economics, I think we can all agree is first and foremost about trade-offs, right? There's pluses and minuses to every policy, right?
Yeah, yeah. Germinal, I think that one was directed at you, so that was a lot. Have fun with that.
No, but he has a point. In fact, let me show you this.
Oh,
Oh man, I'm
So you
getting
see this
familiar.
book?
yes.
So it's called The Principles of Economic Planning. It's basically, if you want to be a true Keynesian, that's a book to read because it
Mm.
literally tells you how to plan an economy. And his point about um, price control is true. Like in the short term, it does work, of course, but in the long term, it doesn't. So if you know that you're going to implement price control for like 2 or 3 months, no problem. It's going to be very efficient. But if you're going to implement that for a year or 2 or 3 years, then it's going to lead to many distortions. But in economics, in my opinion, I think it's always important to think long term rather than the short term. And when you think about long term consequences, you see that uh, free market or market oriented policies work better than socialist policies. Like socialist policies, they always work fine at first because they help fix situations that the market takes time to fix itself in the short term. But in the long term, they don't work. That's why they become inefficient. And price control is one of those policies that in the first few weeks or months it works fine. It helps balance the economy. But after that, it becomes a problem. And in this book, they explain it. So I definitely recommend for people who want to understand more about economic planning.
All right. Oh, Johnny left again. Okay, Johnny called in again. Johnny, you have anything else, or are you good?
Oh no, sorry about that. I accidentally hit the wrong button. Hang
Oh,
up, mute right next to each other. You just missed slightly, right? No, I was
no.
gonna say I'm glad you brought up intellectual property laws because did you guys ever read Dean Baker? He's an economist that's talked a lot about intellectual property, copyrights, patents. I think he has a lot of good ideas on that, and I think it's been a very quiet revolution that people may not be aware of how much intellectual property laws have changed. Matt Stoller's done some good write-ups on that, so those are two people whose work I'm familiar with, and they've gotten a lot tighter now. I mean, there's a lot of access to courts in America is a very expensive proposition. A lot of the big guys can throw litigation at each other, almost for sport, and it's just very hard for smaller players to get into that stuff. Companies game the patent system, they abuse it. I mean, intellectual property has become very, it's changed a lot over decades. And I think you were onto points about whether you have governments produce insulin, whether you just break the patent and just say, all right, your time's up. You can't do it anymore. There's a number of mechanisms that we could make things like prescription drugs better, and quite literally, all of them are better than the current system. But I thought that was a good vein of discussion there, and it's actually interesting. How intellectual property laws were used in the U.S. Matt Stoller wrote about how Microsoft got started, right? And how Bill Gates got started. One of the keys there was IBM was told not to go dominate software because they were already so dominant in hardware in, say, like the 50s and 60s. And Microsoft got a start in the 60s and 70s, I want to say, because IBM was told not to be in the software market because they already dominated hardware so much. The U.S. government was putting a lot of anti-trust pressure on them. And, so Microsoft got in there at a time when IBM itself was under pressure and they had a software product to sell. So IBM, said, all right, fine, we can't dominate this. We'll have to do business with these guys, Microsoft. And, Bill Gates was able to turn that into a business and eventually become a monopolist himself after the political winds changed and courts got a lot more aggressive about defending intellectual property. And Microsoft was able to turn a operating system monopoly into a browser monopoly, into an office software monopoly, and just extend it into a whole bunch of other areas of computing. So I'll jump off. I'll let you guys chew on that one if you want, or you can ignore it and move on. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks,
man.
Johnny.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man. You have anything you want to respond to in there, Germinal?
Oh no,
Or
I mean, like I think he gave like a good context of how of what's going on with intellectual property. And intellectual property is even a field that I need to even dig more into it myself because I mean, as a business owner, like I have intellectual property that I need to file and stuff. So yeah, this is an area and I need to dig more into. But overall, like I have my opinions on it, and when we come back to the issue of insulin, having some pharmaceutical companies having a monopoly on it, yeah, like maybe the government should not step in to produce it itself, but at least to break the pattern after a certain time. Okay, guys, let's let us have like some new guys,
it's like, I mean, they have
producing
a
this.
head start, right? Like they've been producing this for like a really long time.
Yeah,
Like so, and they've been producing it for a long time on their own, and they've been producing it so long they should have some like head starts in terms of infrastructure and specialized knowledge. But like at the eventually you got to like competition in. So yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that that's probably. I mean, I think that would help a lot of things. Um, so I wanted to actually get into more theoretical things because he came up and just said the term price gouging, and the idea of price gouging basically it implies that the real price is something lower than what it is being bought for, than what it's being sold and bought for. And I wanted to get your take on this is, do you think there is such a thing as price gouging or like wage theft? This idea that there are profits that are in fact excess, that there is real value, and then there is what companies give you. Like basically, it's kind of the idea of like the labor theory of value versus the I think it's a utilization theory. I'm curious on where you are on that because Keene came down somewhere in the middle, I think. And I'm curious about that. Do you think price gouging is like a real thing, or do you think it's just a word for when demand is really high and supply isn't high yet?
I think it's more when demand is pretty high and stuff. Because at the end of the day, uh, in one of my books, I argue against the labor theory of value because uh, value is based on how the consumer perceives the goods. If he sees any utility in it. Let me give you an example. This book, for example, is 490 pages that I wrote. It's just one volume here.
Well,
And I can spend years writing this book, and you, John, you can read it, and you're like, all right, you know what? This book is trash. And you go and you write on Amazon that this book is trash, and people go and they read your review, and based on your review, no one buys it. But you say this book is trash because you did not derive any utility
utility.
from the book that you've read, no matter how much work I put into. And that's where I think that Marx was wrong, because he thinks that based on how much work you put into the good you're producing, therefore the price should be the price should reflect that. The price only reflects supply and demand. Yes, you put a price just as a trial and error to see how it takes, and based on how many people purchase the same good, now you realize that, okay, well, there are a lot of people who are buying it. We don't have enough in stock. We have to increase the price to so that they will hold off and we can produce more, and vice versa. So um I think the labor theory of value is not accurate in terms of determining the value of a good or service, like how the price is added to the good or service being produced.
Yeah. Um, I think I mean I tend to agree. So Keene had this idea that I want to run by you. I wanted to ask him this question and I forgot and I've been upset about it for like 2 weeks because I wonder what he would have said. But he seemed to think that a good theory of value was basically the utility given to the consumer, and then you subtract the cost of production from that, and then you get like profit basically. And that's kind of where the value came from. He said that the utilization theory of value alone doesn't work when you have to like aggregate variables. He was referring to stock markets. It was going over my head like a little bit, I have to say. But the question occurred to me is like, isn't cost of production like based on utilization like theory of value as well? Like how much you have to pay for labor, how much you pay for materials, isn't
Yeah,
that subjective too? So
yeah.
I was wondering if you could clarify that if you knew what theory he was referring to. Like it'd be great because it's been bugging me for like 2 weeks.
No, I know that the cost of production is important, because without that you cannot, in my opinion, you cannot truly derive the initial value of whatever you're producing. So whatever, as I said, if I take again the example of this book, right? The cost of production is me, my skill, and time involved in producing this book. That's my cost of production. So based on that, I've now put a price on the market, and and see how the consumer is going to reply to that, is going to react to that price. So when we produce a good or a service, we always include the price of production in it, no matter what, because that's how you even know the gross profit of the business, how it works, and that's even helps you determine the net income and everything else. So, but the cost of production and how the consumer value the product or service that you're selling, there's a gap in between, and that's
Well,
where, like, it's
so the Marxists would disagree, right? So I hear this a lot from actually people who have like the
sorry,
theory.
it's loud. I can hear you.
That's okay.
Yeah, we
Uh-oh.
go ahead. Just
Someone's in trouble. Someone's in trouble. Um, Yeah. So the Marxists would disagree. They would say that that gap is theft, right? If whatever profit you're making, it just means that there is excess value being put in by the laborers that you need to pay them. Or by people in the system. Basically, I think how you define laborer is like kind of a problem, but let's just say everyone other than like investors. Let's even pretend like the CEO is a laborer, but just everybody except for the investors. Do you like, what do you think? Why is that wrong exactly?
well, it's wrong because they completely omit supply and demand. As I said, yes, you're producing the thing. Yes, you include the cost of production into the product or service you're producing. But if the consumer doesn't like what you're producing, it doesn't matter. You're not generating any income from it. So if like you, even though yes, you include the cost of production and the consumer like it, well, it's a win-win for the consumer and for you as the firm because now there's more income. And now what you can do with that income, you can even like you can pay more people, you can hire more people, you can do a lot of things. You can expand, you can do a lot of things with that income. So I don't think it's right for Marxists to argue that uh that excess is necessarily theft because that's not true. It all depends on supply and demand, how consumers react to whatever you're selling them. Because at the end, as I said, if they don't like what you're producing, no matter the time, the time, the labor power you put into it, it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell. That's why you have many startups that fail because sometimes people don't like the product you're producing or you're providing them.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I think that, I mean, I tend to agree. I don't really have much to say other than I tend to agree. Um, I wanted to back up to the some we were talking about the Great Depression for a second. So the Great Depression is something that gets pointed to quite a bit as an example of how government intervention like is a good thing. The New Deal like cut short the Depression or World War II did. I was curious what you thought about that. Do you think that that's true? Do you really think that the Great Depression kind of shows the failure of free market through the boom and bust cycle and the triumph of government? Or okay, you don't think so? Why
No.
not? Because that's what I was taught in the history books, man. When I was in high school, that was in my textbook. FDR's New Deal saved America from the evil capitalist Great Depression. So I imagine a lot of people believe that. I am skeptical, but I don't know actually why that's wrong. So please.
No, there's the fundamental issue with the Great Depression was a matter of monetary policy. That's all. There was not enough money in circulation. The velocity of money was not high at the time in the economy, and the Federal Reserve, instead of injecting more money in the economy to stimulate demand, they kept applying a contractionary monetary policy. And that contraction is what led to the Great Depression. Because when prices are reduced further and further, then consumers react to it by saying that they're going to wait and see how far prices will decline. And in the meantime, the businesses are not getting any profit, you're right, because there's no income coming in. So what happens is that they have to start laying people off. They have to cut their costs, and and then that also leads to bank don't have enough liquidity. So and then the rumors spread around that there's a bank run, so everyone goes to the bank to get the money out, and so on and so forth. So if the Federal Reserve had applied the right monetary policy to maintain the money supply at the same level as real output, we wouldn't have a depression at all.
Not
So
at
it
all?
wasn't.
So what
No,
brought
we
on the
wouldn't have a
Great Depression
depression.
then?
Yeah, so it wasn't a failure of capitalism. It was a failure, or it was simply poor monetary policy that was applied.
What exactly brought it on then?
What do you
Um,
mean?
are you saying that every economic recession can be blamed on poor governmental policy? or
Well,
in
well,
part,
yes,
maybe?
because everything is based on how the Federal Reserve manipulate interest rates. Because if they manipulate interest rate, if they put it below market value or above market value, well, people will react to it. If you put it below market value, you incentivize people to borrow more, to borrow more, and as more people borrow, you're increasing production. So on the entrepreneurial side, more entrepreneurs borrow, and for consumers, more people like borrow to buy a house, to buy a car, and stuff like that. And that is a way to stimulate spending, because as people spend, corporations get more money and they can expand on their on their production and ventures. But when you increase interest rates, then it's harder for people to borrow money. So now, like, costs starting to become higher than revenues, and that's when you see corporation uh, cutting off, like firing people. They're cutting the costs off, and on the consumer side, you see people now spending less, saving more. So there's no money coming in for corporations. So, but that all depends on how the Federal Reserve decide on interest rates.
Simon, I have questions, but Solomon asks what required the Fed to need to stimulate the economy in the first place during the Great Depression. You're just saying that miscalculated interest rates just
No, it was mainly miscalculated money supply. It was even it's my assessment is based on Milton Friedman's book, A History of Monetary Policy in the United States. He explained that the money supply fell by a third by 1929 or 1930. So if the Federal Reserve started increasing the money supply instead of decreasing it, then they could have avoided the Great Depression, because there
okay,
was not enough money in the economy.
sure. So Keen posited to me this idea that so a business cycle, the boom and bust, is that normal? Do you think that that would exist under a unmolested free market, or do you think the boom and bust, the business cycle, is kind of more an artificial thing brought on by government? Because what he suggested is that it's natural, but that government could make it less severe or more severe. I mean, he's post Keynesian. He thought like he was telling me that like basically if we like tax more, spend less during the good times, and then spend more and tax less during the bad times, will like lessen the severity. That kind of idea. So I'm just curious on your just boom and bust cycle overall. Do you think that exists without government, or do you think government causes it?
No, I think boom and bust exist because at the end of the day, we are all human beings, and there are periods where things are dry. Where
Pessimistic
you
or optimistic, right? Yeah.
was it?
Well, we either get optimistic about the future or we get pessimistic, right? But I
Yeah.
think we're on
So
both.
no, I think boom and bust are real. They exist, but I think the government is the one that determines the magnitude of the cycle,
So
because
would
that's
you
what I'm
agree?
saying.
So would
Based
you?
on based on how they manipulate interest rates, they kind of like push if we have like a overheated economy or a underheated economy. Because if it's overheated, that's when you know that we're going to have a crash. If it's
Right.
also underheated, like the way it was in
Okay.
1929, because especially towards the end, there was not enough money. Now it was up to the Federal Reserve to simply put the right amount into the economy to get the economy rolling, but instead it didn't. So it's and it led to the crash. But I don't think under a pure free market we won't have any boom and bust cycle. I don't think that's true. I think it's
Okay.
important to remain realistic. It's true we all love the free market, but let's be realistic and less ideology, less ideological about and try to be realistic. I think boom and bust cycle are a natural phenomenon of an economic system, especially in the market economy.
So would you? So what should we do about this? Do you think we should leave the boom and bust cycle alone, or do you think? Would you agree with the traditional Keynesian policy? Like I said, just when the economy is like in the dumps, you lower taxes increase spending, and when the economy is hot and doing well, you vice versa. Would you agree with this type of thing? The government trying
Well, when the whether the economy is high or low,
to
government shouldn't. I don't think government should do much. In my opinion, I
not even
think.
to flatten the variation, right? Because instead you just flatten the variation, make it less extreme. You,
Well, no,
you think
I
that'll work?
think at the end of the day, economic um economic crises have always existed since human beings exist, and people always ended up getting back to normal. Even we have economic crisis. So now, when it comes to the Great Depression, it's true that yes, the it was so severe that it would take much longer for the market to recover. But the issue is this, right? And I think that's where people don't understand Keynes. Keynes saw the role of government in the economy when it comes to rectify depressions as a short-term thing. So
Yeah,
basically, the the economy is experiencing a recession. You apply various monetary and fiscal policies to make the economy recovering. And once the economy recovers, you're supposed to step out. But the government decide to step in and
just
becoming
stay
a
in.
permanent actor of the economy. And that's where now it's even makes things worse. That's when like now we have the debt that is increasing. We have taxes that become much higher because the government say, oh yeah, like we're going to decrease taxes. We're going to have more spending in public infrastructures to bring employment at its full capacity.
Right.
So
That's we should only be doing that when the economy is going down, but we're doing it
exactly,
all the time. On the flip
exactly,
side, you're supposed to increase taxes and lower spending when we're doing well. But instead,
yeah.
we want to, we want to minimize our down, but we also want to like maximize our high, and that's not how that works. You gotta,
So that's it. So I think like because to me the economy, especially the business cycle, is a natural cycle.
Mhm.
When the way I see it is that when we are experiencing a downside of the economy, it means that uh, a particular industry or some corporations within that industry have reached a point where it's time for them to go. Like it's a recycling moment. That's how I
Mhm.
see it. It's like a recycling moment where now we need new blood, we need new corporation, we need new businesses to produce better product or services in that industry.
But instead, we have government keep them alive, too big to
And
fail,
that's a
right?
problem.
And that's a
Yeah,
problem,
so when government prevents a corporation from failing, it's technically giving them the power of monopoly because you
right?
said, you know what, no matter what happens, you will never fail. So you can keep raising the price. You don't have to
Well,
innovate. You don't have to do XYZ. It
well, it's
doesn't
like
matter. We will still
right.
support you.
You've gotten so powerful, like so many people rely on you that us government, we're not going to allow you to fail. Actually,
Yeah,
yeah. And again, like this is kind of what you're talking about. Is it's and this is something Sowell talks about too. But it's like you're not looking at it long term enough, right? And because in the long
exactly.
term, this big corporation that a lot of people rely on, this corporation dying is actually going to be better for everybody in the long term. But that's not a
Exactly.
politically convenient bitch to like 6 million people. That's not what you want to say. It's like, oh, we know you're hurting, but it's convenient right now. It's inconvenient, but it's good for the long run. Like that's a hard sell politically. So instead,
Yeah.
they go and save. Um, and the same people who helped cause the subprime mortgage crisis are still they're still kicking now. So
Yeah.
that's good.
At least one good thing with the subprime mortgage that government did was to let Lehman Brothers die. I think they should have let more other investment banking die too, not just Lehman Brothers.
Mm. Johnny GL says, I think that we're selling short a lot of New Deal and post World War II policy regimes that led to big improvements in society. Um, I don't know. FDR subsidized federal student loans, and now college is like the most expensive thing that God has ever seen. So that part wasn't great. I mean, what do you think? Do you
Yeah.
think we're being too hard on old FDR?
No, I think we've been fair. He made government. extremely powerful. But one thing to understand,
He also threatened the Supreme Court. For those of you who don't know that, the Supreme Court was striking down his economic policies as unconstitutional, and then he
yeah,
threatened to pack the court. Like he literally threatened them. And then
yeah,
they
and
made
and
him.
and
For those
and,
of you
and
who
the
don't
thing
know that,
is, and the thing is that uh, the reason why FDR was able to do all the things that he did was because the American people wanted.
right,
They want a strong leader. They want someone uh, that will solve their problems. They were looking for more government. That's why I was able to do all these things, because the depression was so brutal. Like people are like, yo, we whatever they have to do to let us out of it, we're gonna go for it.
right. Johnny GL points to Social Security, HFA, farming policies, Breton. I mean, what do you think about those policies? Do you think those are worthwhile? Like Social Security? What do you think?
Nah, Social Security could have been privatized.
Think so?
Nah, yeah, it could have been privatized. Like there was no need to, because Social Security is simply you taking basically money from people producing the wealth to pay for people who are retiring. Fine, I understand the moral argument behind it, but economically, uh, it's not a good system. Because if you privatize it, then everyone who's producing the wealth can contribute to his own retirement instead of paying for others. So I think social security should exist, but should be privatized instead of being a government organization. And France is experiencing the same. Uh, they're relying on government to plan their retirement instead of having the whole industry privatized.
And how would that make it better? Exactly.
Because if the industry is privatized, people will actually keep more of them own money, right? Because when you have social security, government takes from your income, and it takes a portion that maybe sometimes you may need it. So at least if you have to plan for your own retirement, you understand how much you have to put maybe each month or each quarter, and then you have professionals in those private organizations that can help you plan accordingly. So it's like kind of having like a financial advisor. But when you let it to the government just take that money and give it to older people, but you now have less to plan for your own retirement.
Right. So I like this idea theoretically because it assumes that everybody's like a competent agent. Unfortunately, I think we both know that not all American citizens are financially illiterate or,
True.
thinking in the long term, or even if they are, when you get old, things can go wrong with your mind, stuff like that. So how does a private industry handle that sort of thing? Handles people who just don't take care of themselves and then they're like 80 and they're broke. And let's say, like, ideally in a healthy culture, like we have strong family units and that basically takes care of everything, but we have
Mhm.
to live in the reality that we live in, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So I mean, what do you think there? Do you think like elder welfare for the elderly is something that would be okay? um
Well, I think yeah, I think like welfare for the elderly will be okay, but it depends on how we do it, right? That's what I'm saying. Like if you know we have a way of privatizing it by reducing the cost, that would be even be more appealing to elderly people. They say, okay, you pay a special fee per year, a fee that when you pay, you don't even feel like it's a lot in your bank statements when you check, right? And then you've been taken care of for certain things. So I think that way, and plus, if we have other businesses that are doing the same thing, so we have more competition in that industry, which will lower the cost and it will increase the quality. Then people could come up with better services to assist to assist older people.
right. Yeah, and I think again, most of this could be solved if we get, if we get more local, right? Because like imagine if we got rid of federal social security and then your social security was like I mean, I guess this would be harder because people move quite a lot, but something like a local social security system, um, like even that would just make more sense. There's just more trust
Yeah,
there. The
yeah.
lifestyles are more similar, like stuff like that. But I guess I have a final line of questioning for you. It's the big
Okay.
one. It's modern monetary theory. We were talking about Social Security and how basically like our children's children will be paying for our grandparents' retirement because we just take the money and just throw it somewhere else, and we're just so enormously in debt. So the theory that I've heard, I was told reliably by my textbooks written by Paul Krugman, is that essentially because America is the big dog, we can print as much money as we want, and basically everyone just has to shut up and take it because we are the most stable, we are the most economically powerful. Our full faith and credit is very faithful, I suppose, and that because we are an economic producer, we print our own money, we'll never go the way of Greece because they're reliant on the euro, which is produced outside of Greece. So I'm curious what you think about this. Do you think that modern monetary theory holds water, or do you think the bill always do you think the bill always comes due? Like, where are you on this?
Well, it's a
I
theory.
imagine I know why. I think I know where you are, but I'd like for you to explain your position here and let me poke
Well,
you.
it's a theory. That's why it will always be a theory because it's completely ludicrous. Because to print money indefinitely, what do you expect the consequence will be from that? There's a reason why this theory was never applied. If
Well,
printing money
I
had
feel like it
no,
might be applied right now. I feel like we're actively applying it and seeing what happens, right? Like
well,
there's
right
more money.
now, no, well, right now the money supply has started decreasing because we have too much liquidity in the economy. That's why the increasing interest rates because
More and
it's too
higher
much.
inflation. I guess that's true,
Yeah,
actually.
because what happened? You know what happened with COVID? They print more money, stimulus check, boost. It
Right.
boosts
Inflation.
prices, and because people have money to spend, everyone felt richer. So now the money started to become worthless. When you print a lot of money, money becomes worthless, and
But
people know that's why. That's why they don't. Even though they don't print indefinitely.
our debt keeps going up. Is that going to be a problem? Do you think? Like, do you think we'll ever have to pay off our debt as like
No,
the
we'll
U.S.?
never pay our debt. I don't think we'll never. I don't think we'll ever pay our debt.
Does anybody think we'll really pay our debt? Because if nobody actually believes that, then
No,
shouldn't
the whole
the
economy
full
runs
faith
on
and
debt.
credit go away? If nobody believes we're ever going to pay the debt back, then why do we keep like going into debt sustainably? How does that work?
Well, because the whole economy runs on debt. Like we have, like our economy is big. It's kind of like a bond market. If you think about it, it's all based on credit. So the more debt you take, the more you stimulate people to you encourage people to borrow and to spend on that debt because uh, the United States knows that they're never going to pay their debt. Yes, there's a debt ceiling. What is going to happen? They make it like as it's the end of the world. Not that I don't support it, but what like the realistic outcome of this is that they're going to extend it. Congress is may even Congress may even pass a new law, extend it, and say, you know what, we're going to increase the debt ceiling. So instead of like, I don't know what, I don't know, I don't remember the current debt ceiling. I don't know if it's like 40 something trillion,
I don't know what it is. They're
but
fighting over it right now. Republicans are being stupid about it.
yeah. So like so they will simply extend it. So we'll keep on taking debt and taking debt. On top of that, there's so many other countries that are taking debt from us.
Hmm.
So it's debt on debt on debt.
Everyone's in debt. Like, so
Yeah,
is your
everyone is
position
in
on
debt,
the
and
idea?
no one will ever pay it.
Well, yeah. So as long as we manage our money supply, if we can basically increase our debt essentially infinitely, and it's probably fine because everybody else is also in debt. Right, because like if I'm an in debt country and you're an in debt country, and I try to call my debt on you, all of a sudden they'll call it back on me, and then
Yeah,
we're both screwed. So like it's just eternal Mexican standoff, and no one's gonna fire.
yeah,
is that really what the world
and on
economy
top
runs
of
on?
that, and on top of that, the U.S. is I mean, the dollar is the currency of the world.
Right.
So when people borrow, they borrow in dollars. They don't borrow in other currencies.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so like we are in debt. Western Europe is in debt. China, uh, Japan is even one of the most countries in debt. Australia is in debt. Kind of like everyone is in debt. So I don't think the debt is something we're going to repay. It's something that our great grandchildren and great grandchildren are all the ones that will have to repay for it. But I don't even think it will be repaid fully
And do
because the
you not
government
think
will keep on
and do
borrowing.
you think that's fine? Like if you could get rid of the debt, would you? Like what
Oh
are
yeah,
any
absolutely.
drawbacks?
If we if we could, I would. But unfortunately, we reach a point where it's virtually impossible to get rid of the debt.
Well, what are the
The only
drawbacks
president,
of that?
the only president who actually got rid of the debt was Andrew Jackson. He's the one who brought the debt completely to zero or like nearly zero.
Damn. Good for
Yeah,
him. Well, I mean, yeah,
yeah, he was the only one.
that guy had some other problems, but I
Yeah.
guess that's good. So if the whole world is run on debt and everyone's in debt, then what would be the benefits of trying to get our debt under control? Like what would be the benefits? Would there be any?
Well, I mean, I mean, definitely there will be some benefit. One of the benefit it will be to loosen or to lessen the burden or of repaying that debt to on the future generations. Because the more debt we're taking, the more we are, the more burden we are imposing on the future generations. Suppose you are taking debt on everything, your student loans, car loans, mortgage. You want to start a business, you take loans, and you can literally not pay for any of those debts. And then let's say you have kids. Now that debt is going to fall on them. And if
Right.
also they cannot pay that debt, that debt is going to fall on your grandkids, and and
Right.
so on and so forth. So so that's why like it's more about trying to become financially responsible. That's why they're trying to limit the debt and be like, okay, at least I try to pay some of it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go. Okay. So last question for you. I was gonna ask you about more cultural things, but I like this question better actually. To end out the show here, is so if you were president, or let's not say president because the president has limited power. Let's say like God King of the U.S. What three economic policies would you institute, or economic related policies? I'm not picky. Just give me your top three. What would you do day one?
The first is to okay. First, I will sign an executive order that will make financially literacy mandatory because I am sick of people complain. I think like not sick. Okay, this is not no. That's not the right way to say it. Uh, I think one of the reasons why people are struggling financially is because of a certain lifestyle they have and the lack of financial education that they also have. So when you have a certain lifestyle and you don't have the financial education to back that lifestyle, you're making very poor financial choices. And a lot of Americans do like do lack financial education. So I think and this is something we don't teach in school. We don't teach people in school about financial education. And I think it's important
Yeah.
for people to understand financial education. The second law that I would probably implement is to cut many government programs to really reduce government to like maximum 10 10 uh 10 programs like defense, Department of Justice. uh I don't have all the thing in my mind, but I think we have way too many government agencies. So I'm going to cut them, a lot of them to like, yeah, 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Round
the
number.
third one, I would say,
You could
the
get rid of
Supreme,
income tax.
what I
You
say?
could, you could get rid of income tax. You could
Yeah,
do that.
actually, that's a good one. Yeah, the income tax. And then if the only type of tax that we may pay is like a sales tax.
Okay, so why is that better exactly? Why is it better to have no income tax and a sales tax as
Because
opposed?
when you have no income tax, you retain your money.
Right,
You retain your money, you can spend it on whatever you believe is lucrative for you,
right.
right?
So you're getting and okay. Yeah. I think that was actually a proposal by the Republicans recently, is basically
Yeah,
kill all tax, all of it,
yeah,
and then like a 30% sales tax or something.
yeah.
And
Sales side,
and
because
then
at the
just
end of the
nothing
day,
else.
because
Right.
at the end of the day, whenever you purchase something, anyways, you still have to pay sales tax. So I have no problem paying a sales tax, but the income tax, like you make, suppose you make 100K, you're in the high income bracket, and they say you have to pay 37
Yeah.
percent of those 100K. So this is 37,000.
And it's also going to be somewhat
Wow.
progressive, right? It's going to be progressive because rich people tend to spend more and buy more things, and therefore, like the sales tax is going to hit them more. And then if you're more, frugal, it's like right because if you're not as wealthy and you don't buy as much because you can't, you're literally not going to be impacted in the same way. So
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
and that's why, like, the income tax should be abolished. Even if for now, like with the income tax, if they have to change it, they should change it to a flat tax rate, in my opinion.
a flat percentage, yeah.
Yeah, a flat tax, like the way
Why
they
is
did
that
in.
exactly? Because you've heard the argument, I'm sure, that $1 to a person who only makes $10 a day is comparatively a lot more than, I don't know, $10 to a guy who makes 100 a day, right? Like it's the same percentage, but in terms of life impact, it's very different, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we were to implement a flat tax, you don't tax the working class, right? Being generous. You say, okay, I know you guys don't make much. We're going to tax the middle and the upper class, but the same tax rate. So I think that makes it more efficient, first of all, for people and then for businesses too, because people get to retain more. Because when you tax people who make more higher than everyone else, you are incentivizing them to actually put a value added to the economy. Well,
Right.
the
You're
only thing
selling
they're going to
incentive.
do, because I think that those guys, and on top of that, like rich people have accountants, so
So
they will
right.
they
So
will
they'll
ask
always
the
find they'll
accountants
find
to
the
look
loopholes.
for every possible tax loophole in the system, to every possible loophole in the tax system, so that they will pay less taxes. So when you have a progressive income tax, it always falls on the middle class, because rich people, they have like offshore accounts where they can send
Maneuver.
the money there. They always find a way to not
Yeah.
pay tax. But the middle class doesn't have that privilege, so
Right.
everything falls on them.
Right. So last question before we take our callers. Um, right. This is what
Wait,
Travis.
wait, how much? Oh wow, almost 2 hours. Damn, man.
Yeah. 2 hours is usually when we finish. I'm sorry I've kept you so long. My bad, man. I was really
That's
enjoying the
fine.
talk. I was trying to get out of here at an hour and a half, but it's not gonna happen. So last thing, and then we'll bring in our callers and we'll be done. And this is basically Travis's question: is are lack of incentives always bad? So there's two things that I've heard. Is this is something I hear a lot, is that this idea that the incentives will cause them to stop is wrong because their profit margins are so large. That keeping prices low, or these regulations or taxes, they won't actually cut into production. They'll just cut into very beefy profit margins for rich people, and it won't change production at all. Why is that? I imagine you don't think that's true. Why is that exactly? Because I hear it all the time. And then you have Travis's question, which is kind of built into that: is less incentive always bad, or not? So I'm gonna let you run with that, and then we'll take callers.
Uh, While less incentive is always bad because there's no production, because people need to be incentivized in order to produce. And when they produce, they're adding value to the economy. And one thing people need to understand is that rich people, at the end of the day, when you reach a certain level of income in life, most of your wealth is actually based on your investments rather than real money. So
Right.
rich people don't even need like the income, for they don't need to work. They don't need like actual income like a middle class person does. Rich people, they always invest in different type of asset class, and when there is a progressive income tax coming after them, they're simply going to invest in tax exempt securities. So they always, as I said, they always find a way, no
Right.
matter what happens, to still pay less taxes. because rich
And
people, they rely more on the investment money than the actual income they made compared to.
so you think that increased taxes, it won't bite into profit margins. It will bite into production. It will bite
Yeah,
directly into production,
yeah,
and that's
it
because the
will
rich people
affect
will
more
always
production
protect
and
their
profit
money,
margin.
and
What's
it
it?
will, and the reason for that is because the rich people will always protect their money in non-taxable things. They prefer to
Yeah,
sacrifice the productivity of their business
yeah.
than
They
sacrifice
always,
their
yeah,
wealth.
yeah, because they do have the means to protect their money and the investments.
Right.
When, as I say, when there's a income tax, a progressive income tax implemented, the things they do is that, as I say, they ask their accountants to look for every loopholes in the tax code so that they won't have to pay. And one of the things they do is to invest in tax exempt securities. So again, the money is their investments are protected.
Travis has another question, but we'll go to him after we get our first caller. Phil, welcome. Thank you for your patience. All right, you got a minute, man. What's your question?
Hey, John. Hey, Germinal. Thanks for taking
Hey.
the call. Hey, earlier you were talking about the causes of Great Depression, and I think you said something like the money supply. It was low. It had to do with monetary policy. Is that right so far?
Yeah.
So how does the government go about increasing the money supply in a situation like that?
Well, everything depends on the level of real output. So what the government wants to do is to match the level of money supply with real output. Usually, we say inflation is good when it increases moderately. The economists are usually proponents of the Taylor rule, which have a policy target of 2% increase in the general level of prices. So small increase in the general level of prices is considered healthy for the economy. And at the time of the Great Depression, basically, we were starting having a deflation. We were getting into a deflationary state. And as I explained before, the problem with deflation is that although it's good because things are cheap, but the cheaper they become, people are less tempted to buy because they want to see to what extent prices will fall. But in the meantime, businesses are no longer selling because no one is buying. So it's becoming a problem. So in this case, what the Federal Reserve should have done is to increase the money supply so that people will have more money to spend. It would have increases the prices of goods and services.
But how do
And
they actually do that? What's the lever they actually push? They don't helicopter the money, right? How do they increase this money supply? I'm just curious.
well, I guess that the federal government is the one that has the power to print. So they, as I say, like they are the data, they're the one that look at the level of real output, and based on that, they're trying to match it to maintain the economy in balance.
Um, no, I'm just trying. I'm actually wondering like that the actual mechanism of pumping
Yeah.
the money in, like there's low money supply. Like I know this sounds very like dumb level, but I don't know economics. I'm the government. I see this problem. I've correctly identified it, and I go, oh damn, I gotta get the money supply up. I print the money, and now what do? I hose it out over everyone? Is there something involving changing interest rates to cause people? Like what? How does it work?
So basically, like the central bank prints money and basically allocate that money into commercial banks,
Ah,
and now commercial banks incentivize people to borrow because that's how commercial banks make their money by interest payments. So people borrow, and so consumers borrow to for mortgage, for cars, for for whatever stuff they want to buy, and corporations borrow, for business expansions. So that's how the government allocate the money. So that when they print money and they want to distribute it, they send it through commercial banks because
that's really
people have
interesting.
yeah,
So,
because people have access to commercial banks. They don't have access to the central bank. Only commercial banks have access to the central banks.
so
So when the
that's
central
oh,
banks
sorry.
define, yeah, sorry, I'm finishing. When the central banks define the level of interest rates, commercial banks have to go with that. So if, for example, uh, let's say the central bank say, okay, interest rates are at 2%, that means that commercial banks, when they loan money to people, they have to, the lowest they can give is 2%. They can give below that because that's the benchmark that the central bank fixate the interest rate. But now for people who don't really have good credit, they can increase they can increase the loan. And that's what I argued even one of my books, that banks should have done with the subprime mortgage, because bank got greedy. Instead of turning down people who cannot repay the loan based on the poor credit score, they gave people loans at a really really cheap interest rate, and then we saw what happened in 2008.
Thanks, Phil. Vlad, you got 60 seconds. Question. We're rapid firing our callers
Quick
because we want to get
question.
you out of here, Germinal.
Okay, so
Thanks
my
for your
question
patience,
is,
man. What's up?
in the 60s, President JFK tried to enact GSR, which is basically global economic security and recovery act, and he got shut down. Obviously, he died. And then in 2020, just before he lost the election, Trump tried to do the same thing with NESARA, which is National Economic Security and Recovery Act. That's basically kind of what you were saying earlier. I don't know if you called it this, where it's no longer you're no longer getting taxed income tax, but it's now based on sales tax. Would the country be better? Most countries be better if we went under the NESARA, which basically does away with the IRS. It takes a hold of the central banking system, and it puts the control in the people, the government and the people, and nobody has to pay income tax anymore. It's all based on sales tax. Is it good or is it bad? I know you talked a little bit about it earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no,
Yeah.
yeah, I personally believe that a sales tax will be better because we're already paying it. Because at least with a sales tax, when you get paid, when you receive your income, you get to retain the full, your full income. You don't have to pay income tax from the minute you get paid. So the sales
More
tax
choice.
now will force people to adjust their spending, right?
Right.
For people who love to spend, they will think twice before spending because there's that sales tax.
Maybe it'll even help with consumerist culture, right? Which I
Exactly,
personally am not a
because
massive fan
exactly
of.
because we do spend a lot. I don't know if you saw that, but yesterday I posted on my Instagram that there was an opinion written on Bloomberg's opinion saying that people are digging into their savings, their 401k, to for Beyonce tickets. I'm like, this is ludicrous. Like, first of all, you're struggling, and you're sure, and I can tell you, these are the same people that complain that they live in paycheck to paycheck. So if you're
Right.
living to paycheck, why are you digging in your savings to go make someone else richer? Because
Because
those tickets are not $50. Those tickets are like $500, $600.
our cultural values are askew. That's why.
Exactly. So imagine if we had a sales tax on those tickets.
Yeah.
Maybe there is, but
Uh,
like, let's say if we have a real like high sales tax, maybe people will think twice before buying it.
okay. Shardall, you have a question. Then UHF actually was only giving a setup, so I'll read something and then we're gonna be done. Okay, Shardall, go ahead. 60 seconds. What's your question?
And I really like that you're talking about libertarian economics because I don't really get into this. Like I don't really keep track of this, but it's really interesting to learn about what liberalism is and how it differs from other types of economics.
Shardall, we can't really hear you.
Let me just call back.
Okay. I think she's gonna call back. So we'll give her like 5 minutes, tops. UHF asks that if why not let the government spend whatever money they were going to put into the money supply? Why wouldn't you just let that money be spent on infrastructure? Why have the extra supply loaned out through commercial banks instead of the government spending it directly on infrastructure? Asks UHF. That's gonna be our final question for the day. You can read it in the chat there.
Yeah. Okay, so given that we grow the management needed to government, why not let government spend that sum through infrastructures at that time?
Right.
Well, that's what the government did. That's what they actually did, because when the Great Depression happened, one of the focus of government was to bring employment at its full capacity. And the way to do that was to invest heavily in infrastructures. So, but before that, but prior to the Great Depression, government didn't really need to spend, because the federal government will not just give money to the Federal Reserve will not just give money to the federal government without the federal government asking. The federal government needs to submit a proposal explaining why they need that money. So if at the time the federal government did not have that money, maybe it's because they did not need it. It was more consumers and businesses that needed that money, and the federal government and the Federal Reserve, failed to supply the adequate quantity of money necessary to make to get the economy going.
The final question that's halfway a joke, and then we'll get you out of here. Would you end the Fed?
Yes.
You would end the Fed?
Yeah. In fact, I would break it and decentralize it into like small local banks, rather than having a big central bank. Why? Because at the
It's pretty
time of
crazy it can decide the entire economy. Like, that's pretty wild. That, like,
I know,
my
but at
guy.
the time, but think about this. At the time of the free banking era, the United States had very, very few financial crises. The financial crisis that the country encountered started when we had the national banking era. Basically, we start centralizing monetary policy, and the government, and that's why they created the Federal Reserve, to prevent bank runs, to prevent to prevent financial crisis from happening again. And yet, the Great Depression happened after the Federal Reserve was created. The financial crisis of 2008 happened, although the Federal Reserve was already in existence. But at the time when there was no Federal Reserve, every state has their own charter banks. The country had very, very few financial crises. I was even shocked to discover that myself. So,
okay. Well, Germinal G says end the Fed. That's a good one to end on. All right.
decentralize
Travis,
it, then end it.
just decentralize it and end it. Yeah, okay. Travis has put your Twitter in the chat. Everybody go follow him. He's on Instagram. He's on Twitter. He's written like a bajillion books, some good articles. I read your articles when I was younger, and I was like arguing with people about economics. Like, I'd read your articles because Forbes wasn't really cutting it. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Everybody, if you want more conversations like this, join the Pangburn Discord server. Subscribe to the show. We have another show tonight. We have my show every week, Mondays and sometimes Fridays. Please come back again. I loved having you all. Germinal, thank you for being so generous with your time. I really
Thank you very much. Next time I will come more prepared. I didn't know it would be that long. Otherwise, I would be more prepared.
No, well, I'm sorry. I usually give everybody. I usually let people know the time. The times, and I completely forgot. I'm so sorry. I should have given you.
No worries, man. It was definitely my pleasure. Thank you for picking my brain. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
I appreciate you, man. All right. Yep, everybody. That's gonna be it. Thank you all for being here. I will see you all next time on the War of Ideas. Bye-bye.